Howdy YouTube, it's Sam Antares here, coming back for part 3 of Face Slappers Yu-Gi-Oh! Where I'm counting down the top 13 monster, spell, and trap effects for trolling, disrupting, and usually infuriating your enemies. As I said initially, I'm not ranking these cards on effectiveness, on popularity, but rather on nostalgia. Usability is a factor, and how funny they are when they actually go off. That said, we've already counted down traps and spells in our first two parts, so let's dive into top 13 monster effects for trolls. Number 13. This one I put on here actually for usability, but it's also funny to see the look on people's faces. Curry Volt. The Zexal series' first addition to the Karibo family, this guy does something new. Rather than preventing damage, he actually prevents your opponent's effects from going off. Curry Volt's ability is that he can eat the XYZ materials off of your opponent's Xseed monsters, thus robbing him of the ability to use their effects, and summoning out his brothers. In this case, more Curry Volts. And since each of them can use their effect immediately upon being summoned, you could completely neuter one of your opponent's Xseed monsters with a single play. Oh yeah, and then go into a level 1 Xseed yourself, but none of them are really helpful. So, I'm afraid you can't get any higher, buddy. Number 12. Hyena. Ever since I first started playing the game, I've been a fan of the monsters that I refer to as piñatas. That is to say, when you hit them, stuff comes out. In the case of Hyena, when you hit him, he brings out more hyenas. The exact wording is that if he is sent to the graveyard by battle, you can special summon any other hyenas that happen to be in your deck. So you could either bring out 2 more at once, or if you'd like to keep this going for a while to stall out, you can bring them one at a time and force your opponent to go through each of them. Either way, it's a fun little trick. It helps you keep some field presence up, and it doesn't really have a cost to it. So he ranks number 12 on usability and comedy. Number 11. An old favorite of mine, the Yomi ship. Well, what is Yomi ship? Well, Yomi is a Japanese word that roughly translates to underworld or potentially hell. So, this is a boat to hell. The way it does that, when your opponent's monster kills this monster in battle, they get dragged onto the graveyard for the ride. A fun little trap and almost a forerunner, or perhaps sequel, to Maneater Bug, with a bit higher stats to make up for it. The only downside is those stats aren't really high enough to make him a threat on his own, so he's only useful for his effect. That said, he's a staple of stall decks, and I've played with him myself quite a few times, so he gets here both on usefulness and nostalgia. Also, you get to tell your opponent that they're going on a cruise. So, number 10. In case of Ojamas, break glass and bust out the Doom Donuts. This is a little level 1 monster with literally no attack or defense power. Makes up for it with a very funny, if situational ability. As soon as he is flipped face up, by any means, he kills every monster in play that has an original attack or defense value of 0. So, that takes out the entire Ojama deck, and also can really have some fun with zombies and certain archetypes that focus on having more attack or defense, respectively. A fun little card with a fun little effect. Scores up number 10, but stays there for not being all that useful outside of a couple situations. Number 9. Another type of monster I like using. TV Tropes refers to an action bomb as any character or creature that explodes or otherwise harms you upon its own death. In this case, Gigastone Omega, a rock-type monster with solid defense of 2300, and an effect that if it's killed by a card effect, very likely the only way it's going to die, your opponent loses all of their own spells and traps. Held back by the difficulty of using him, but even that can be mitigated. You just have to have 2 earth monsters in your graveyard to remove from play, and you've got a wall that your enemy does not want to break down. Number 8. Well, here's one that anybody who watched the first season of the show, well, the American show, should remember. The time bomb known as Blast Sphere. This one scores up for the trolling potential, nostalgia, and usability. What Blast Sphere does is that rather than dying in battle, he attaches to the enemy's monster, and the next turn explodes, killing the monster and causing damage to your opponent. The only drawback is because he doesn't destroy the opponent outright, they can get around this by tributing, sinking, or any other means getting rid of it. That said, the look of panic on their face if they don't have a way to get rid of the time bomb is just priceless. Also, it appeared in the show and was dealt with in a very interesting way, so he gets points for that too. Number 7. So, speaking of monsters your opponent doesn't want to kill, Cursed Fig. This one has an effect similar to Gigastone, in that if he is sent to the graveyard in battle, he seals up 2 of your opponent's face-down spells and traps, keeping them from being used for as long as he's in the grave. Situational? Actually, not really. Just as long as he doesn't die by a card effect, and they're probably not going to waste one on him if they've got a monster that they think is strong enough to kill him. He also gets points for nostalgia, coming out in a set that I really enjoyed playing with. And the Fig himself was a mainstay in my deck for some time to come, and still slides back in there from time to time. Useful, nostalgic, and funny. He scores number 7. Number 6. What's that? I hear the screaming of everyone that ever had to fight against a Lightsworn deck. And I really want to join in. Let me introduce you to Honest, because if they'd called him Jesus, they'd have gotten in trouble. This guy comes packing 2 effects that are custom built for trolling your enemy. The first effect, once per turn, during either of your main phase, you can take him off the field and put him back into your hand, allowing you to attack and retreat without fear of retaliation. But we know that's not why everyone used him. This thing has the ability to buff up any light element monster its controller has by the attack power of any opponent's monster that attacks, meaning a guaranteed kill, guaranteed damage, and all at the cost of ditching 1 card from your hand, specifically Honest himself. There's a reason this thing got restricted in tournament play. That said, for a card for trolls, he definitely ranks up there. So, this Angel of Destruction comes in at number 6. Number 5. So, remember that Yomi ship we talked about earlier? Here's the captain. DD Warrior. An old school card actually first appearing in the Game Boy games. When he was printed in the real series, he was given the effect to drag any monster that he battles out of the game completely. The best part? That effect can even go off if he's destroyed in battle. So, wait for your opponent's big gun to show up, throw him in front of it, and watch the fireworks. If you want to see faces contorted with rage, throw him down. Kindly tell your opponent to go directly to hell, do not pass go, and do not collect $200. So, ranking in at number 4. So, anybody happen to have Bill Murray's number? Because I got a rodent problem. Neospatian Grand Mole. The namesake and key component of the Mole Lock strategy, this guy can both escape battle damage and remove an enemy monster by bouncing both it and himself back to the hand the minute an attack is declared. Meaning nobody takes damage, they lost their monster, and as long as you can keep bringing him into play, they can't do a thing about it. Comes in at number 4, purely off of annoyance. And so now, before we get to our top 3, I'm going to bring out some honorable mentions that didn't quite make the cut. Hero Shadow Scout, an annoying little card that really never found itself useful enough to stay in my deck. But still, he's old school, and he's funny, and when he works, he can be devastating. Fencing Fire Ferret. Alliteration aside, this is a nifty little card, and actually might have ranked above Yomi Ship and DD Warrior, but he just doesn't have the nostalgia value. He's a very new card, and came out at a time when he really couldn't be useful. So, I like him, but I can't really put him on this list. Rigorous Reaver. Much like the Ferret, this guy had an effect that might have been nice, but he came out well after the time that I could use him even casually. Also, while his effect's annoying, he can hurt you too because he causes both players to discard from their hand. Setting him off at the wrong time can mess up your whole strategy, and that's just not funny. And so, moving on, the top 3 trolling monster effects for Yu-Gi-Oh! Number 3, Nekomane King. This cat of misfortune comes packing an effect that can save you and screw your opponent over entirely. If he is sent to the graveyard by your opponent's card effect at any time during their turn, that turn ends immediately. If you can't understand why this is annoying, you don't play the game. So, your opponent blows up all face-down cards. Guess who was face-down? Your opponent tries to kill the monster with the lowest attack power. 0. Your opponent decides to drop down Raigeki. Guess who just showed up via trap effect? This little guy is a disruptor from hell. He's always funny, and nobody ever sees him coming. So he scores in at number 3. Number 2. An old classic and a favorite of mine for years before Konami decided to ban him. Morphing Jar number 2. Those of you who saw the first season of the American show might think you recognize this as Bakura's ace card. This is not Morphing Jar. This is his bigger, angrier brother. Upon being flipped, Morphing Jar 2 runs back to the deck and takes everyone's monsters with him. Then, both players have to mill cards off the top of their deck until they find a number equal to what they threw back. The best part? Because he's in the graveyard if he was destroyed by battle, he doesn't count himself. This thing can potentially trash your opponent's entire deck and disrupt their strategy. Also, since the monsters brought back are in defense position, he'll effectively end the battle phase on the spot. The downside is, it was too good. With the advent of pendulum monsters allowing people to fill up their fields so easily, this thing would have been a game breaker, and so I disagree with the ban being preemptive as it was, but he would not have lasted in competitive play. That said, if you got some friends around who don't mind you breaking the ban list, break this guy out and they'll change their tune. So now we have counted down 12 of the best monster effects for trolling your opponent. Now we come to number 1. Not only is he the top on this list, he's one of my favorite cards. I ran it for years before a ban did away with it. And I believe this might be the number 1 troll card, not just out of monsters, but in the entire game. Cyber Jar. At first glance, not as powerful as Morphing Jar, no. He ranks up here for nostalgia. When Cyber Jar is activated, he blows up every monster on the field, including himself, then forces both players to draw 5 cards and immediately summon any monsters that they find there. Sure, maybe not as good as his brothers, but he opens a black hole. That's got to count for something. Also, nostalgia everywhere. From the minute I got my first copy of this card, which in fact is this one right here in my hand, I have always kept at least one in my collection, and almost always in my deck. This has gotten me out of so many jams. It's a fun card to play with, and god damn it, Konami, take him off the ban list and maybe I'll consider playing again. And so there we are. Part 3 of Face Slappers Yu-Gi-Oh! And the introduction to my Lucky13 series of countdowns. What am I counting down next? I still haven't decided. Possibly something explosive. Next time on Lucky13, top 13 weapons from Ratchet and Clank. In the meantime, please hit like and subscribe, and this is Sim Antares, signing out.